And they'll be able to somehow track a lot of these
Yes.
different places
Yes.
from there. Okay. Bill Allison, thank you for being in the Washington Journal.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the House of Representatives is coming into session as we speak. Thanks for being with us.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., May 12, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Graves to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House on January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and the minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Didn't know which Miller from California.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this Congress is entering its 5th month without bringing a single jobs bill to the House floor. And there are no jobs bills in sight. But we do hear calls for a series of trade agreements, including ones with Colombia and Korea. At a time when millions of Americans are still looking for work, the House will be spending time protecting corporate investments in foreign countries and not jobs here at home. At a time when multinational corporations have fired 2.9 million American workers, they will be hiring 2.4 million workers overseas. The House will be spending time shoring up the corporate overseas investments rather than encouraging investments here at home. At a time when so many in the Middle East are rising up for democracy and human rights and are receiving support from the United States for those efforts, the House is taking up trade agreements with Colombia that fail to live up to those very values. One of our most important responsibilities as elected officials is to promote and to protect American jobs. We do this by trying to ensure that American workers do not face unfair competition with countries that keep wages low by repressing essential democratic rights. These are important rights: the rights to speak out, the rights to protest, the rights to organize unions, the rights to bargain collectively and directly with their employers, and to support political efforts to improve their economic conditions without reprisals. But reprisals are what you get in China. Thousands of strikes last year were met not by their employers, but by the police and the army beating up on the workers who were seeking better wages, better working conditions in plants all across China. What you get when you protest your rights in Colombia, you get assassinations, you get death squads against union members, union leaders, members of union families all across the country. The American worker can compete, but you can't compete against the Colombian army, the Colombian death squads, the Chinese army. That's not fair competition. But that's what's protected in these trade agreements. Tragically, Colombia stands out as a country where wages are kept low and workers are repressed through the widespread violence and other human rights violations. Colombia has earned the reputation as the most dangerous country on earth for workers trying to build a better life. During the last Colombian president's 8 years in office, 570 union members were assassinated, 149 in the last 3 years, and the violence hasn't stopped with the election of a new president. Reports of assassinations against union members and leaders keep coming. The two most recent ones were on April 8th, assassinations of Romero Sanchez. He was shot repeatedly as he left a union meeting. Mr. Sanchez received death threats from organizing workers to demand local hiring of an oil company. On March 30th, the assassination of Hector Orozco, who was an official with the Peasants Farmers Union. He and his colleagues, Geraldo Garcia, were found murdered. Days earlier, Mr. Orozco reported that he and other peasants were threatened by army officers. On the top of the violence is the problem of impunity. Authorities have only investigated a quarter of the union killings since 1986. No one has been held accountable for 98% of the crimes against unionists. The violence with impunity comes together with another recent case. A few weeks ago, Judge Gloria Genoa was shot in the head in broad daylight. At the time, she was presiding over a politically sensitive case of a military officer accused of murdering 3 children, one of whom he apparently admitted to raping. Now Colombia, with the new president who says he wants to turn the page in Colombia past. But these murders and human rights violations are not the past, they are happening today. Before we consider any agreement with Colombia on free trade, And the real changes must come to Colombia. That is why I've joined with colleagues to lay out a series of benchmarks that should be met by Colombia before the Obama administration sends Congress any trade agreement with that country. These benchmarks are designed to reduce the violence, to protect human rights, and to end the impunity of the death squads in the Army as the actions they take against these families. They require on-the-ground results and verification. The administration, however, has adopted an action plan for Colombia that does not demand the results on the ground. I appreciate that U.S. and Colombia finally are bringing labor rights into the equation, but their plan only demands results on paper. Under their plan, nothing really needs to actually change in Colombia. Colombia could have a record year of assassinations and still meet the requirements of the plan. Indeed, before the action plan has been fully implemented, the administration is already preparing the way with Congress to implement this trade agreement. If this action plan were fully enforceable under the agreement and into the future, we could have something more than just results on paper. Unless it is enforceable, this is less than a serious commitment. It is not fair to Colombians, it's not fair to the American workers, and it's not fair to our national values and does not reflect our national values. The American worker can compete with any worker in the world. They're rated time and again the most productive workers in the world. But they cannot compete against currency manipulation in China. They cannot compete against the Chinese army that breaks up the rights of workers to protest, and they cannot compete against the death squads that have been assigned to assassinate union members, union leaders, and union families.
The gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes. Without objection. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the recent unprecedented action by the National Labor Relations Board is simply the latest example of this administration putting politics before the needs of the American people. I honestly never thought I'd see the day when our government sued a company over creating jobs in South Carolina or anywhere in the United States. The NLRB's position violates states' 10th Amendment liberties and attempts to roll back worker protections for the purpose of satisfying special interests and union bosses. The NLRB was created to protect workers' rights, but now the worker is left out of the equation in favor of big union. I ask, what about the workers in South Carolina who lose out in this action? Where have their rights been considered in all this nonsense? In fact, the National Labor Relations Act says in Section 1 that the purpose of the NLRA is to promote the full flow of commerce, to prescribe the legitimate rights of both employees and employers in their relations affecting commerce, to provide orderly and peaceful procedures preventing the interference by either with the legitimate rights of the other, to protect the rights of individual employees and their relations with labor organizations whose activities affect commerce, to define and prescribe practices on the part of labor and management which affect commerce and are inimical with the general welfare, and protect the rights of public in connection with labor disputes affecting commerce. The NLRB's ruling comes on the heels of previous threats by this radically out-of-touch panel to sue states like South Carolina for constitutionally protecting one of America's most universal freedoms, the right to a secret ballot. Fear that the federal government might take away that fundamental principle prompted voters in South Carolina, Arizona, South Dakota, and Utah to overwhelmingly support adding secret ballot protection to their state constitutions. If the NLRB hadn't already made a big enough mockery of individual freedom, they even refused to come to the negotiation table and talk about their concerns with states' attorneys general unless they were willing to first sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing them from sharing what was discussed during the meetings. Demanding secret meetings, threats, attacking the right to a secret ballot doesn't exactly create a good track record for the National Labor Relations Board. That's what prompted me to introduce House Resolution 1047, the State Right to Vote Act, which would stop the NLRB from suing states whose voters took a stand against union thuggery for secret ballot elections. And if the NLRB doesn't change the course quickly, I know there will be many in this body, including myself, who will call for the panel's removal altogether. But, Mr. Speaker, this latest outrage is a unique power grab. Against constitutional and Supreme Court precedents, the NLRB's actions are a clear attack on our state. Think about the context. This administration has spent our nation into oblivion, doubling the national debt in 2 short years, running over businesses both large and small, mounting takeover after takeover, and reducing the size and scope of our economy in the process. South Carolina's unemployment rate finally dips below 10%, and what does this administration do? It sues one of the largest prospective employers in our state just as that company begins to hire workers, potentially costing South Carolina thousands of jobs. Mr. Speaker, I may be new to Washington, but I promise you I was not born yesterday. Looking at the NLRB's policy and examining recent electoral maps, it's not difficult to see a policy that clearly rewards blue states while severely punishing red ones. Under the NLRB's interpretation of the law, a company with a union workforce anchored in a blue state could not expand or relocate to a red state. Limiting where companies can conduct businesses sounds like something that would take place in China or the old Soviet Union, not here in the United States. Since when did America stop being the land of the free? Let me give this message to anyone looking to start a company in America. Choose your location well. If this action by NLRB is upheld, trust me when I say that we won't be talking about companies making decisions over moving to a right-to-work state versus a union state. We will see decisions made in the context of locating in America or another country. And what this outrageous action by the NLRB tells you is that you're stuck with very few options. Give in to the union's demands, close up your shop, or take your production outside the United States. The NLRB's actions say build your company somewhere else, but not in America. So much for the American dream. Mr. Speaker, this action by the NLRB is unconstitutional and illegal. I call on my colleagues in the Education and Workforce Committee to hold hearings into this bureaucratic atrocity. My South Carolina colleagues and I have introduced legislation to defund this latest lawsuit. I ask all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to rescue the American dream and sign on to this legislation. I also ask the American people, pay attention to this problem. Our founding fathers will be appalled by this bureaucratic tyranny. It's time to hold our elected officials accountable. Do we want to just say that we're a free nation, or do we really want to be a free nation? Our freedom is under attack. It's time we take a stand. May God continue to bless America, and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor the legacy of an extraordinary Marylander, Maryland's Governor William Donald Schaefer. He died just a few weeks ago after a long time of public service. William Donald Schaefer was one of the great American mayors. Few mayors can ever say that they transformed a city as thoroughly as did William Donald Schaefer transforming Baltimore. But over his 16 years tenure as mayor of Baltimore, he led a dramatic and historic turnaround. In 1971, when his mayoralty started, Baltimore was a struggling city, a city plagued by population flight, crime, and decaying urban infrastructure. When so many had given up on Baltimore, Mayor Schaefer made it his mission to stand up to that decay. And we can still see his legacy today. It is a legacy that includes physical landmarks like Camden Yards, the National Aquarium, Baltimore's Harbor Place, and an outstanding light rail system, projects that he saw through to completion as both mayor and governor of our state. Just as importantly, Mayor Schaefer's legacy came in thousands of gestures that showed just how deeply he cared about the people he represented and how seriously he took his work. Personally addressing illegal dumping in alleys or broken equipment at parks, driving through the city at night on the lookout for everything from potholes to crime trouble spots, and even jumping into the aquarium's seal pool, complete with a rubber ducky when the city failed to complete the aquarium on time. My colleague from Washington State is shaking his head, from Oregon, shaking his head because we all know that famous picture. Above all, his colorful, passionate, and dedicated leadership added up to the change not just in Baltimore's appearance and infrastructure, but in the mindset of the words of the Baltimore Sun when they said he changed the way the city felt about itself. How important leaders are to make that happen in the minds of their people. We have an agenda, by the way, that is Make It in America, that is trying to change that psychology as well, that we're going to make it. We're going to succeed. We're going to expand. William Donald Schaefer brought that same dedication to his 2 terms as Maryland governor. His trademark, no-nonsense style, do it now, was his byword. It was on display in Annapolis, where he pursued an agenda focused on job creation, strengthening Maryland schools, which, by the way, now rank #1 in the country, and protecting Maryland's natural heritage, including our beloved Chesapeake Bay. After reaching the highest point in Maryland politics, many would have ridden off into the sunset, but not William Donald Schaefer. He couldn't get enough of the work he loved, and he ran for state comptroller and won twice. In his last job, he was one of our state's most respected voices for fiscal responsibility. Before he died, Governor Schaefer was asked how he'd like to be remembered, and he answered, there are 2 words, quote, he cared, close quote. People, he said, mock me and make fun of it, but it's the truth. And as someone who worked closely with William Donald Schaefer throughout his years as mayor and governor and comptroller, I can say without any hesitation or fear of contradiction, William Donald Schaefer cared. He was a man of the people. He listened, he acted. It is the truth, and it mattered because at the time when so many wrote of our cities, caring took remarkable courage and strength. A great architect, Mr. Speaker, was once laid to rest in a building he himself had designed. His tombstone read, and I quote, if you seek his monument, look around you. Those words apply just as well to William Donald Schaefer. And I hope that the people he served will bear them in mind whenever they enjoy the best of the city of Baltimore and the best of the state of Maryland. Well done, our good and faithful servant. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. For the past 12 years, John Snyder from Medford, Oregon, has been my district director. He's decided to move on now to pursue other opportunities and other careers. But to me, he was more than just district director. He was my mentor, he's my partner, and always my friend. John Snyder is a terrific man, a great fan of the Oregon Ducks, and he served 3 members of Congress in this district as district director, including my most recent predecessor, Robert F. Smith. He was born and raised in Medford, and his roots run deep in the Rogue Valley. He is a guy's guy. He is a terrific man. My current district office actually sits adjacent to the former Snyder Dairy, which his family had, which is now part of downtown Medford. John and his wife Candy currently live in the Rogue Valley, and John's daughter Robin lives up in Grants Pass. John graduated from St. Mary's High School and was its student body president. He graduated from the University of Oregon and is a rabid, to say the least, Oregon Ducks fan. And my wife and I had the opportunity to be with John and Candy at the championship game in Arizona earlier this year. And among the 10,000 or 20,000 people at the reception ahead of time, we actually bumped into each other there, as fate would have it, and had a wonderful evening. John served our country as a member of the United States Coast Guard and as president of the Rotary Club of Medford, where his attendance always spiked when I was the speaker. He was always so busy he never got to his own Rotary Club, so they always fined him extra heavily when I was there, because then he was with me and they had their opportunity to get at him. John was my eyes and ears throughout the 2nd District, which is 70,000 square miles of eastern, central, and southern Oregon. We, I think, have traveled in about every conveyance possible, from a wagon behind a tractor to jet engine aircraft, single engine aircraft, twin engine aircraft. We've traveled in those airplanes, small, chartered, with others on our staff who didn't fare as well as John and I. They turned a little green and white and had problems at times. John and I always sort of traveled through it. We have driven in snow and rain and ice and sleet and everything we hear about postal officials from one end of the district to the other. We have flown, we have driven, we have hiked, we have walked, we have been on boats and airplanes, and you name it. And always at my side, John Snyder. When the water was cut off to the Klamath Basin 10 years ago, John was there with me at the Beckett Brigade, where we took water symbolically out of Lake Ewanna and passed it through 15,000 people into the A Canal, symbolizing this horrible thing that the government had done to the farmers. That deeply affected all of us in the 2nd District, and especially John and me. And his commitment to those farmers and ranchers continues today, as does mine. When it came to saving the Medford tanker base so that firefighting aircraft could make their circle around the Rogue Valley quicker rather than being shoved out to another hour's flight away, John was right there day and night, working with Commissioner Walker and others to make sure we could preserve that firefighting base in Medford. And we did. And it's made an enormous difference in saving lives and property. When President Bush came out to both the Applegate and Redmond, John was there helping organize the events ahead of time. And any of you who have been involved in a presidential visit to your district, you know it happens pretty quickly. And you basically go 24/7, and things get changed in the middle of the night, and requests come and go. We need a band. No, we don't need a band. We need a garrison-sized flag. No, we don't. John was there making sure it all happened. John has served as one of my most important advisors and is passionate about issues related to water and timber, small business development, and the people. He's well-liked by everyone who's ever met or worked with John Snyder. He was a true leader in our community and remains so today. So today I rise to take the time of the House to honor and recognize my longtime only, until he decided to move on, District Director John Snyder, to wish him and his wife Candy and John's daughter Robin the very best in the years ahead. We look forward to continuing our friendship and to working together for the betterment of our great state of Oregon, and always to cheer on the Oregon Ducks. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney. For 5 minutes, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to share with the House a headline which was reported in yesterday's Connecticut media, which I believe is going to reverberate all across the country. It reads that as federal health reforms take effect, Aetna proposes rate cuts. Now, for employers who have been seeing double-digit increases for the last decade, to see a headline that says health insurance premiums are going to be cut probably seems like it must be a typo, or there must be some April Fool's headline joke. But the fact of the matter is as the story indicates, because of the federal health care reform law, the new premiums, which are going to go into effect in September, that Aetna is proposing, have to be reduced from anywhere from 5 to 19%. For policy holders, the savings with these new premium announcements will be up to $3,500 a year on policies that cost about $14,000 today. Why is this happening? It's because the health care reform law contains a provision which says that insurers must demonstrate that up to 80 to 85% of premium dollars have to be spent on health care. It is called the medical loss ratio rule. And under existing premiums that Aetna is collecting these days, only 54% of premium dollars are presently being paid on health care. Now, again, as someone who was a small employer before I came to Congress in 2007 and paid those double-digit increases year in and year out, what we're seeing now is the fact that there is transparency in terms of how premiums are being handled, and that people are now understanding, and in fact regulators are enforcing a rule which says that when you pay health insurance premiums, the bulk of it, not all of it, but the bulk of it actually has to be spent on health care. And because of this rule, the medical loss ratio rule, we saw yesterday that Aetna is proposing to cut health insurance premiums for employers, and this is going to be replicated all across the country over the upcoming year as the Department of Health and Human Services are issuing these rules to state insurance departments for implementation. Thank goodness for those employers who are now going to be seeing real rate relief that we did not repeal the health care reform law. Thank goodness for those employers who are getting small business tax credits back in the mail today for their IRS filings that they submitted this year that we did not repeal the health care reform law. Thank goodness for all the employers across America who are now participating in the early retiree health insurance program, which over half the Fortune 500 companies in America have signed up for as a way of moderating early retiree health insurance costs so that they can encourage employees 55 and up to take retirement, opening up opportunities for younger workers in this country, which we desperately need, looking at graduating classes that are facing daunting employment prospects. The fact of the matter is the health care reform law, in terms of small business tax credits, real rate cut relief, early retiree programs that help employment-based health benefits, is now rippling through the system and providing help for thousands and thousands of employers all across this country. We know now that the health care reform law is helping almost 1 million young Americans between the ages of 21 and 26 stay on their parents' health insurance plan. I was with a student up at the University of Connecticut the other day. His sister was months away from graduating at NYU when she was diagnosed with a rare nerve disorder, and thank goodness for the health care reform law that she was able to stay on her parents' health care plan, and now she's receiving life-saving treatments that is going to allow her to attend law school starting next year. For seniors, we are seeing the new Medicare provisions that will close the donut hole, that will provide preventive services like annual checkups, cancer screenings that are now covered 100% by the Medicare program as a direct result of the health care reform law. These benefits are now flowing through the system with a bill that was fiscally responsible and that CBO scored as a net saver to America's budget deficit. Again, I want to make sure people see this headline that employer-based premiums are going down because of the health care reform law provisions that will protect employers and individuals who buy health insurance so that their premium dollar is actually going to be spent on health care and not on excessive administrative costs and bonuses for people in the insurance industry. Again, I come from Connecticut. We're proud of the insurance industry. My dad worked as an insurance company lawyer for his whole lifetime, sent me to college because of that. The fact of the matter is these rules are something that the insurance industry can coexist with. They can make a healthy profit. They can grow their business, but it will stabilize the market so that people are not going to be forced to abandon coverage for their workers and for themselves because of the skyrocketing double-digit increases that we've been experiencing as a nation for far too long. We have relief in sight, and this headline verifies that. And let's preserve these protections and make sure that our employers and individuals have access to affordable health care. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 5 minutes.
Stand and revise my remarks.
Without objection. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, good morning. As many of you know, this week is National Police Week, a time to give special recognition to law enforcement officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty for the safety and protection of others. I come before you today to honor one of my constituents who did just that. On April 23, 2011, Johnson County Deputy Sheriff Clifton Taylor was first to the scene of a reported domestic disturbance in Venus, Texas. An anonymous caller had reported a man was threatening people with a weapon. Upon arriving at the scene, Deputy Taylor, 2 other Johnson County deputies, and an officer from the Venus Police Department were informed that an armed man had fled to another building on the property. Deputy Taylor and the 3 other officers approached the building, but the gunman immediately opened fire. Deputy Taylor was shot 3 times by the gunman and later died. He was 31 years old. His death marks the first time since 1971 that an officer in the Johnson County died in the line of duty, and he is the 31st law enforcement officer to be killed by gunfire in the line of duty this year. Deputy Taylor had been with the department a little more than 3 years. He was deeply committed to serving and protecting his community as a law enforcement officer and will always be remembered as one who placed honor and duty above his own personal interest and safety. I am deeply humbled by his service and dedication as a Texas law enforcement officer to keeping others safe, that he would lay down his life not only for his fellow officers, but for the community that he took an oath to protect. His sacrifice exemplifies that set forth in John 15:13. Greater love had no man than this, than a man who laid down his life for his friends. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back balance of his time. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wilson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I rise for one reason, to talk about creating jobs, jobs, jobs. I have been a member of Congress for 18 weeks, and I still have not seen any plan that would create jobs. My constituents are hurting. They need help, and I don't see any coming. They are losing their homes. They need jobs. I did not come to Congress to drill, baby, drill. I did not come to Congress to hand out corporate tax breaks, and I did not come to Congress to end Medicare as we know it. I came to create jobs. Graduations are happening all across the nation, and I can't help but wonder, what sort of world will our graduates be entering? What will happen to the class of 2011? Under the Republican budget plan, graduates are entering a world with job losses and stifled economic growth. Under the Republican legislative agenda, graduates are entering a world in which Big All is given a free pass to drill, baby, drill with limited safety regulations, and a free pass to drill with limited environmental safeguards. Under the Republican-controlled House, new graduates are entering into a world in which their elected officials waste time and energy trying to repeal meaningful health care reform. Health care reform is creating jobs for the class of 2011. Thousands of students will be trained in the health care field. Don't repeal their jobs in health care. Leave Obamacare alone. Leave their jobs alone. A new graduate doesn't care about personal crusades lawmakers wage against women's rights and abortions. They care about jobs. They care about our nation's future. They care about their future. Instead of political games, the time has come to focus on jobs. The time has come to focus on our nation's future. As states all across the nation are facing severe fiscal problems, let's stop focusing on ways to end Medicare as we know it and ways to destroy the social support network that has taken generations to build in this country. Our seniors need Medicare. It is the safety net and infrastructure all seniors need as they grow older. Seniors are living longer. They get their prescription drugs. They can play with their grandchildren, and they are striving under Medicare. Leave Medicare alone. I propose that from now until August, each of us here in this chamber come to Washington remembering the mandate from our constituents. Focus on jobs, jobs, jobs. I don't care what kind of tea you party with. I don't care who your presidential candidate is. I don't care how much press you garner. Join me in focusing on jobs, jobs, jobs. Let's rebuild our manufacturing base. Let's keep our beaches clean. And let's make it in America. Make it in America, baby, and create jobs, jobs, jobs. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. A gallon of gas is over $4, heading to $5. The average family spends $2,200 more per year on gas than they did 2 years ago. 14 million Americans are out of work and wondering how they're going to put food on the table. America's infrastructure is crumbling. A quarter of our bridges are structurally deficient. The American Society of Civil Engineers says all our infrastructure needs are going to cost over $2 trillion for roads, bridges, water, sewer systems, airports, locks, and dams. Where will we find the money? While we send $100 billion each day to foreign nations for oil, OPEC exerts control over world oil prices and wants it to be $200 per barrel. We're 60% dependent on foreign oil and climbing. As a country, we waste 20 to 40% of our energy in inefficient buildings and factories. Mr. Speaker, we want clean air and water. We want to see our highways and bridges fixed. We want clean power plants, lower energy prices, and don't pollute our environment. But where will the money come from? Today, my colleagues and I on the Energy Working Group are introducing the Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act. a bipartisan bill that for the first time brings forward a comprehensive plan to rebuild America, take back our energy future, and create millions of jobs. We can become energy independent, we can create these jobs, and we can do it all without raising taxes or adding to the national debt. How? Well, America has enough offshore reserve to replace all oil imports from Venezuela, Saudi Arabia for the next 80 years, and enough clean natural gas to power our industry for the next 63 years. Yet the drilling moratorium means that instead of using our own resources to grow jobs, we're supporting the economies of unstable regimes that want to do us harm. Our plan opens the door to safe, responsible expansion of energy production off our coasts, where there's $8 trillion worth of economic output in oil and gas reserves offshore. Over 20 years, that translates between $2.5 to $3.7 trillion in new federal revenues from lease rights and royalties without raising taxes. That's $440 billion for infrastructure, our roads and bridges. $330 billion we will invest in renewable energy sources in buildings and transportation. $220 billion for clean coal technology. $88 billion for environmental restoration to clean up our lakes, bays, rivers, and streams. $66 billion in energy conservation. $110 billion for carbon-free technology and nuclear energy development. $66 billion to rebuild our water and sewer systems in small towns and big cities all across America. $44 billion for LIHEAP and $160 billion for states that are producing. And also, several hundred billion to pay down the national debt. Mr. Speaker, there is a plan for jobs and energy in America, and this is the plan that estimates are will create about 1 million jobs each year. New jobs in building highways and bridges, new jobs in developing our energy resources, and we can do it all. I ask my colleagues to support the Infrastructure, Jobs, and Energy Independence Act. Let's rebuild America. Let's create jobs without raising taxes. Let's stop borrowing from foreign nations. Let's pay down our national debt. Let's stop buying from OPEC. And let's use our rules and our laws to make sure we do all of this in a way that is environmentally sound so we can create jobs and have energy independence for this and the next generation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Waltz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, for his leadership, for his vision, and for the understanding that the American people sent us here to do America's work, not one party's work, not ideological rigidness, but the idea to come together that this nation's bounty in terms of energy reserves and mineral resources, if used wisely and safely and reinvested in this nation's future, can produce what we know needs to be done, strengthening our national security by making sure we control our energy destiny, making sure we control our economy, and making sure there's stability in where that energy comes from so that American families and businesses aren't forced through the ups and downs at the whims of nations that hate us. We spend billions, hundreds of billions of dollars sending it to those nations that hate us. Heck, they'll hate us for free. And we can keep those jobs at home, we can keep the money at home, and we can invest. It's not an either-or proposition. Taking the royalties that belong to this nation's people, allowing them to be gained, to be expanded, and to be done in a responsible manner is something everybody in this House wants. We can take those resources, reinvest them. I'm proud to come from southern Minnesota, a place innovation is the air we breathe. The Mayo Clinic. We are the 4th leading producer of wind power. We're the leading producer of biofuels. We have the largest agricultural production and good small employers manufacturing at home. That vision can be one that we control our destiny. There's a group of us together, Democrats and Republicans, introducing something that can become law, that can do these things, that can reinvest in infrastructure, that can reinvest in conservation, that can make sure that we control our destiny, and the things that happen with dictators in the Middle East, the importance goes down. We control those things. We can do it. It's going to be on the floor today. Mr. Speaker, I encourage all of my colleagues to join this piece of legislation. It's visionary. It's a compromise to get to there. It can work. It adds nothing to the national debt but reduces it. It adds nothing in taxes, and it let us control us. This bill, and I will add the gentleman's work and my colleague from California and across this nation, was written by us and the American people, not lobbyists, not special interests. We sat in a room together and agreed to get along, to try and come to things that we could work on to make this country work. That's going to be introduced today. It can happen. We owe it to the American people to get that done. Let's roll up our sleeves, tap that innovation, do the right things, get to work, and make this country energy independent, secure our future both from a security standpoint and an economic standpoint, and create jobs right at home. Believe it or not, there are solutions coming right out of this chamber. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Each year, the White House recognizes outstanding teachers for their contributions to the teaching and learning of mathematics and science through the prestigious Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science. On April 28th, President Obama named 85 teachers as recipients of the 2010 award, one of which was from the 5th District of Pennsylvania, Mifflin County resident Gail Romick, a teacher at State College Area School District. And today I want to thank Ms. Romick for her dedication to her students and commitment to the fields of mathematics. We live in a global economy that is ever-changing and where America is forced to continually adapt, innovate, and find new ways to remain competitive in the global marketplace. Our competitiveness relies on the excellence of individuals in technical fields such as math and science. We rely on dedicated individuals like Ms. Romick to help create our next generation of technical minds. From coast to coast, from urban enclaves to rural towns, teachers across the country are utilizing their expertise and creativity to equip the next generation of Americans to succeed and to lead. Thank you, Ms. Romick, and others like her all across the country that are working to ensure America is competitive for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to join in with my colleagues in the introduction of legislation that we will be discussing later this afternoon, the Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act of 2011. But first of all, I'd like to thank my colleagues who spoke a moment ago, Congressman Tim Murphy and Congressman Tim Walz, both who talked so importantly in the need to get our nation's energy house in order. Since the long gas lines of 1973, policymakers on both sides of the aisle have attempted various efforts to pursue an energy policy that would reduce our dependence on foreign sources of energy. And what has been lacking through all of those efforts since 1973, and that is a long-term plan that has bipartisan buy-in, in which we can stick to it both in the short, near term and longer term to reach those goals. Why hasn't it happened? Because unfortunately too often here in these chambers, the lost art of the political compromise has gone away. But today, with the introduction of the bipartisan Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act of 2011, we have an opportunity to come together as a House, to come together as a nation. This is what the Bipartisan Energy Working Group has done over the last few months to really put together a piece of legislation that reflects past efforts, common sense ideas that would enhance our path toward energy independence and national security through the following means. First, it would increase the production of domestic oil and gas on the Outer Continental Shelf. It would also increase sources of alternative energy, utilizing clean energy technologies whenever possible. In addition to that, it would dedicate a fixed percentage of the royalties that we receive from those oil and gas that is derived from federal lands, both onshore and offshore, the second largest source of revenue to our nation's treasury, to the following purposes. First of all, it would invest in our infrastructure, revitalization and renewal that provides more jobs and that is sorely needed. It would invest in conservation programs. It would invest in environmental restoration projects. It would invest, so importantly, in renewable energy research and development so that once again we can regain the lead around the world. It would invest in clean energy technology as well as increasing development of existing as well as traditional energy sources, like improving our transmission lines. And it would provide energy assistance for those most in need. Sharing a portion of such royalties with producing states also would provide an incentive for those states, increasing the diversification and efficiency of America's transportation system, among other things. As a nation, we must work together toward realistic energy policy. At the end of the day, we cannot afford to take any energy sources off the table. As many of you know, I am a firm believer in using all of the energy tools in our nation's energy toolbox, and that's what we need to do. Conventional energy, together with renewable resources and a strategy for energy conservation, will best serve our long-term energy needs, the best management practices our nation has to offer. As we create new comprehensive energy policy to reduce our dependencies on foreign sources of energy, reducing our dependence on those nations, it will make a big difference in America. I believe it's important for us to understand and agree that realistic transitional timelines as we embark upon this bipartisan energy policy, both in the near term and the long term. Finally, I look forward to cooperating and collaborating again with the members of the Bipartisan Energy Working Group and members of Congress to address ways in which our nation's energy resources can best be utilized to help us to secure that balanced energy future in the 21st century, which all Americans want us to do. And I believe this legislation that we will introduce this afternoon will put us along that path for a long-term, secure energy future for America in the 21st century. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunley. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning in Tupelo, Mississippi, Whiteside's restaurant is quiet. The lights are turned off. Tables around which coffee and conversation had flowed freely, a place where I've enjoyed many great meals, is quiet this morning, and on the front door there's a sign that simply says, "Due to the economy and Uncle Sam, Whiteside's is closed." Donna Whiteside said that the driving force in her closing her business was higher taxes, increased gas prices, and a sluggish economy. Higher gas prices have become a cruel tax on all Americans. Donna Whiteside saw it as her customers had shrinking disposable incomes because of higher gas prices. Donna Whiteside saw that the cost of her groceries were going up because of higher gas prices. What's not helping Americans get relief at the pump is the stalling energy production by this administration. Since taking office, President Obama has actively delayed, blocked, and stalled American energy production. And the American people are sick of these stalling tactics. That's why the House of Representatives is concentrating on 3 key initiatives that will reverse the Obama administration's policies that are hurting families and small businesses, that are destroying jobs, and that are increasing our reliance on foreign oil. Last week, the House passed the Restarting American Offshore Leasing Now Act. It will require the Secretary of Interior to conduct oil and natural gas lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico and offshore Virginia that have been delayed or canceled by this administration. In fact, if we don't have an oil lease this year, it will be the first time in my lifetime that the American public has not had that. Yesterday, the House voted to put the Gulf Back to Work Act. Since the drilling moratorium was officially lifted in October, the administration has chosen to drag their feet and stalled the permitting process in the Gulf. 12 rigs have already left the Gulf for other regions, taking hundreds and even thousands of jobs with them. And this steady decline in oil and natural gas production is costing the United States $4.7 million every day in lost revenues. This act speeds up the drilling permitting process and will put thousands of Americans back to work. Today, we'll vote on the Reversing President Obama's Offshore Moratorium Act. The administration's actions have placed the Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, and areas of Alaska off limits. And this act will implement a smart drilling plan requiring the administration to move forward on American energy production in areas containing the most oil and natural gas resources. In North Mississippi, we're working, leading the way toward helping our nation become energy secure. All three of these bills combined can create up to 1.2 million jobs that will generate revenue that our nation needs, and it will put us on the path to achieving energy security of more American oil, more natural gas, clean coal, nuclear energy, and new technologies such as wind and solar. Donna Whiteside and the thousands of American businesses and families around America, you need to know that the House of Representatives is listening to you. The House Republican American Energy Initiatives will free the American people from the Obama administration's stalling games. If the Senate will consider and pass these legislation, it will put an end to higher gas prices that are straining budgets and are compromising our energy security. Mr. President, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Desjarlais, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I come to the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives to remember the 4 victims who tragically lost their lives in Bledsoe County as a result of the severe storms and tornadoes that struck Middle Tennessee on April 28, 2011. Loretta Winters Bellows was dearly loved by those in her community. She was described by friends as a generous and beloved friend who will be greatly missed. Loretta's sister, Patricia Lynette Thompson, attended Brayton Baptist Church in Graysville and was previously very involved in the Tremont Baptist Church. Those that knew her said that her faith and her church family were a very important part of her life. Her family says they will remember her as the best mother, grandmother, and wife in the world. Debbie Gibbs Fox was known as an avid animal lover, and her husband Harold Sonny Boy Hudson Fox was described by friends as someone with a lightened spirit who was always a joy to be around. To all the families and friends of each of these victims, I'm sorry for your loss and offer my deepest sympathies. I would also like to take a moment to recognize the many emergency management service workers and volunteers that have worked tirelessly to help the victims overcome this terrible tragedy. While touring the damage left by these storms, I was extremely touched by the kindness and generosity of the many people who were there immediately to lend a hand to their neighbors in this great time of need. I know that the rebuilding process will be difficult and that much was lost, but I'm confident that our community will get through this. My wife Amy and I are keeping the families of the affected members in our thoughts and prayers as they begin the process of rebuilding their lives. May God bless you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, it is a privilege to rise this morning and share with my colleagues in the House what my neighbors at home shared with me during the last constituent work period. During those 2 weeks in April, I met with business and community leaders in Wilkes-Barre to see how they're working to keep their downtown alive and vibrant. For example, they've converted an old storefront right in the heart of the city into a business incubator which encourages local entrepreneurs and startup firms. The Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Business and Industry is also trying to restore the city's Iram Temple, a local landmark that is a truly beautiful building, one of the last buildings of its kind in the United States. I toured an ongoing flood control project in the city of Scranton. There, the Army Corps of Engineers is working to make sure the flood walls meet new standards to protect thousands of residents and dozens of businesses. These constituents have been very patient, waiting decades for their relief. Now the Corps of Engineers and the Federal Emergency Management Agency are finalizing plans that will provide the protection that they deserve. About 200 people came out to my home-to-house public forums where they learned about the issues we're tackling here in Congress. I was eager to talk to them about Medicare reform and about the steps we're taking to cut the outrageous overspending. Most of my constituents understood what we're doing here. especially the senior citizens. They know we're trying to save the future for their children and their grandchildren. Many of my constituents also told me they don't want us to raise the debt ceiling without securing substantial budget cuts. But everywhere I went, my neighbors asked me what we're doing here in Congress to lower the price of gas. Over the 2-week constituent work period, regular unleaded gas cost between $3.90 and $4 a gallon. People would come up to me at the gas station as I was filling up and tell me that we need to work harder here to solve this problem. I'm happy to report that this week and last, I voted on 2 bills that will put thousands of Americans back to work while increasing American energy production to help address rising gasoline prices. There are 2 events in the constituent work period that stand out for me. One was speaking to a class of students at St. Jude's School in Mountain Top. These bright, eager young men and women were curious about what we do here in Congress. They asked insightful questions. They wanted to learn about Washington. They offered some insights on how to make their futures brighter. As I continue to examine education and workforce programs as a member of the House Education and Workforce Committee, I will remember these students and their advice. The second event was the arrival of the Patriot flag in my hometown of Hazleton. This giant symbol of the United States is traveling around the country to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. It was my privilege to stand on the steps of City Hall and help first responders, law enforcement, Boy Scouts, and members of the military hold the Patriot flag. Less than 36 hours later, we learned that Osama bin Laden was dead. The death of the most visible face of international terrorism is a historic event, and it is one that unified our country. My neighbors in the 11th District of Pennsylvania are proud to congratulate our brave men and women in our armed forces and intelligence services, and we thank all of them and their families for their continuing sacrifices. We also commend President Obama for taking bold action. The spontaneous celebration after bin Laden's death in front of the White House, at Ground Zero in New York City, and all across the country once again remind us that there is more that unites us than divides us. We are all at the core proud Americans. If we can learn anything from recent events, it is that America is strong and resilient. If we stay dedicated to our efforts, we can get our country back on track. Fueled with the feedback I heard from my neighbors during 2 weeks at home in northeastern Pennsylvania, I am ready to keep fighting for them. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. And pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair now declares the House in recess till noon today.
So, as you heard, the House is in recess until noon Eastern to wrap up work on a bill calling for expanded oil drilling in the Outer Continental Shelf and setting a national goal for oil and gas